Welcome to Dear Human Resources, where we explore the critical issues shaping today's workplace with the voices of HR experts, researchers, and practitioners. I'm Germain, the founder and host of this podcast show. Today's episode dives into the frustrating but all too common experience for job seekers, submitting dozens of resumes and hearing nothing. Why are qualified candidates getting ghosted? And what exactly are recruiters and the bots they use really looking for? So to help us unpack that, I'm joined by Steph Cartwright, a job search strategist, certified resume writer, and the solopreneur behind Off the Clock Resumes. Since 2014, Steph has helped hundreds of job seekers break through barriers and get noticed, offering guidance on everything from resumes to LinkedIn strategy. Steph, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's start with what many job seekers experience, the black hole effect, if you will. Mm-hmm. From your experience, Steph, what are the biggest reasons resumes miss the mark, even when the candidate is really highly qualified?
I'd say there are two huge obstacles that job seekers find themselves trying to overcome. And that's the first being they're focusing way too hard on the technologies, and they're focusing way too hard on getting through ATS and getting through AI, and they're forgetting about the human element that is still involved in hiring, and that's the recruiter. The recruiter who is either looking for them on LinkedIn or looking at their resume and deciding if they're going to move forward in the process. There's just been so much emphasis on getting through the bots, getting through AI, that you start writing your resume or your LinkedIn profile for these bots that frankly are not the issue. It's the recruiter. It's the human element that still needs to be involved. And then the other really big issue I see is really positioning yourself for the jobs that you've had in the past rather than the jobs that you want. And that can be anything from focusing on the wrong skills or just really focusing on what you did versus what you can do for a new employer.
There's a lot of confusion and fear around applicant tracking systems and artificial intelligence in hiring. Could you walk us through how these systems work and what myths job seekers should stop believing?
I think there are a lot of tools online and software programs out there who really focusing on, you got to know how these ATS systems work. You got to get through these bots. You got to get through this AI. When really these are just tools to help HR professionals and help recruiters be more efficient. It's really not about trying to cut qualified job seekers. It's just trying to help those recruiters fight through the noise and find the best applicants, because there are still applicants out there who are just applying for any and everything, that spray and pray method. And ATS is great for, filtering those out, saying, no, you're not actually qualified for this job. I know you'll say you'll take anything, but you're not qualified. When really applicant tracking systems, for one, is a digital filing cabinet for recruiters and HR professionals. It can filter out applicants based on, knockout questions in the application, but not necessarily the resume itself. If you indicate you are definitely not qualified, you're going to be filtered out. But it's less about having the right keywords in that resume and more about, can you position yourself as the best fit for this job? Can you show that you understand and can meet or exceed the goals of this role? And having AI actually can help job seekers who are applying for jobs and maybe don't have the exact phrasing right in their resume. If that ATS is using AI, it will make assumptions about that experience. It'll look at those skill sets you've provided in that information, whether application answer or your resume, and it'll say, okay, this phrasing also implies this experience, which maybe you didn't say explicitly on that resume. So AI can actually help job seekers in a lot of ways. So that myth that AI is going to make it harder for you to land a job is a huge myth. And the whole, having the right keywords in your resume and making sure applicant tracking systems are finding those keywords is starting to become more and more of a myth because of the integration of AI in those systems.
I have right now a neighbor actually who's on the job market. And she's telling me that she tailors her resume and letter applications based on the job posting. And she uses keywords from the job posting into both her resume and letter of motivation. What do you think about that?
I still definitely think it's important to tailor your resume because that's the first impression you're making. And if the impression you're making is, I'm applying for any and every job, you're not positioning yourself as the best fit. So when you tailor it and you use the terminology in the job posting, you're telling that recruiter, A, I paid attention. I read the job posting. I can see what terminology you're using, what skill sets you're looking for. But there is a lot more flexibility in, for example, someone who is applying for jobs that they're looking for project management experience. And maybe you're thinking, well, I don't have that certification. I don't feel comfortable saying I have project management experience, but I have scheduling experience, project coordination experience. That will still translate as under the umbrella of project management and won't necessarily boot you out of consideration just because you didn't use the term or the skill set project management verbatim in your resume. So that's where there is some flexibility and some freedom with, how technology is evolving and being integrated into these ATSs. But ultimately, yes, tailoring your resume is still extremely important, not just for ATS, but for the recruiter on the other side, whose number one priority is finding the best fit.
So beyond beating the bots, which you just said is not always the case, we don't always need to do that. There's still a human on the other end, right? Eventually, anyway. What are recruiters and hiring managers actually looking for when they skim through a resume in just a few seconds?
Each of these gatekeepers are looking for something different. And this is where taking a very balanced approach to writing your resume becomes important. If you write 100% for bots, if you write 100% for ATS, you're going to miss the mark for what recruiters are looking for and then what the hiring managers are looking for. So when your resume gets through to a human being, the first one being, an HR coordinator or a recruiter, what they're looking for in a quick skim is your work history timeline, and they're looking for what position titles you've held, and they're looking for what skill sets you have. So if you have a very easy to skim skills section, that's going to make their job so much easier, especially if it's towards the top of your resume. And then making it really easy to find the position titles you've held throughout your resume. Even just simply making those position titles bold can make their job so much easier and make that resume skim so much more effective for them in the long run for yourself. Then you get to a hiring manager. They already know you're qualified. They're not necessarily looking to make sure that you're qualified. They're looking to see what separates you from the other qualified applicants. And this is where having really strategic bullets that help separate you. They're not talking about just your skill sets or just the responsibilities, but they're showing what you were able to do with those skill sets and what you were able to do beyond your responsibilities. Those are the details that make you stand out, that make you be memorable, and that make a hiring manager say, yeah, we want this person on our team, because they'll probably do very similar things for us that they were able to do for these past employers.
Actually, I had a question related to that, but you kind of answered it. But I'm gonna ask. Still gonna ask it, but in relation to the LinkedIn profile. So, how can a LinkedIn profile help connect the dots for employers that someone is the best fit for the job they want?
LinkedIn is a really nice addendum to a resume, I guess is the best way to phrase it. You have so much more freedom to add more detail to a LinkedIn profile and to give more examples of your skill sets in action. Whereas you're trying to keep your resume concise and effective for skimming. So you're trying to keep your most impactful experience and skill sets within 1 to 2 pages. LinkedIn, you can really elaborate on certain projects in a project section, or you can add multimedia to different areas of your profile that showcase those skills in action, or, whether it's a case study or, just describing how you were able to work through a project and reach a goal. There's so many areas in a LinkedIn profile where you're not as limited as you are on, say, a 1 to 2 page resume. So LinkedIn's really great for just adding those extra pieces that show how you stand out from other qualified applicants. But I will say LinkedIn is, again, very keyword based, where if you have the right keywords, you're going to be appearing in those search results. But there's so much happening on the back end of LinkedIn that makes your profile recommended, even if you don't have the same skills listed for what they're searching for. With the AI integrated into LinkedIn now, you can have your profile recommended based on what you are adding to your profile and saying about yourself, even if you're not using, again, the right keywords. That was always the phrase, with ATS, 10 years ago, is having the right keywords. You're just not going to find yourself as limited.
We don't always think about really polishing our LinkedIn profile. Do recruiters really look at those?
Absolutely. I find more and more recruiters are investing in the time they spend on LinkedIn, especially now that LinkedIn is adding in all these other features from, the open to work feature is there's a lot of love-hate relationship happening with that open to work feature, but it really can signal to recruiters that you're open for a job. Even if you're not unemployed at that time, you're open to something new. It opens up, those passive job seekers to the recruiters who are looking to fill roles. Maybe, you're not actively job searching, but you're the best fit for an opportunity that's going to be higher paying or a better next step in your career path. It opens a lot of doors for recruiters to find people who are not necessarily looking for the jobs they're trying to fill, but are a great fit for them. So yes, recruiters are definitely leaning heavily into LinkedIn. But I think the more you can tell about yourself and the more of a digital footprint you can leave on LinkedIn, the more opportunity you're going to find in making good connections and expanding your reach in your field or industry and getting in front of those recruiters.
So I just mentioned my neighbor who's looking for a job, and she uses keywords from the job description or job posting into her resume and letter application. How can someone determine which skills and abilities are the right ones to showcase on a resume or LinkedIn profile? I mean, the keywords is one of them, but are there other ways to determine that?
I think job seekers tend to overcomplicate this element. I always say start with the requirements or qualifications section. This is where you're going to find the degrees, the certifications, the software programs, and then the actual hard skills that they're looking for. And those are the keywords they're going to be going into LinkedIn or even into their ATS to search, sort, or filter through candidates. So instead of worrying about, 10, 15, 20 plus keywords in your resume, even just focusing on the top 5 in that section will help you so much just be more visible in those results, that when they're trying to narrow down applicants based on what they're looking for. Because if you think about a recruiter, they go into their database, they're not going to be doing complicated queries of, 5, 6, 7 keywords. They're going to start with the main one. I need someone with experience in this skill set, or at least 7 years of experience in this skill set. That's what they're going to use. So that's the number one keyword. I also need someone who is experienced in this software program. So I want to make sure they have that listed on their resume. So those are the couple of things they're going to be using to narrow down those applicants. So you just don't have to worry so much about, the dozens of keywords that might be in a job posting. If you can just focus in on, the requirements and the qualifications that are specifically listed on that job posting, it'll speed up the time it takes you to tailor your resume and also, polish up your LinkedIn profile immensely.
So Steph, you work closely with job seekers who feel perhaps stuck. What are a few key adjustments they can make to not only improve their resume, but rethink, if you will, their entire approach to job searching in 2026 and beyond?
That's a really great question. I think when it comes to feeling stuck, it comes down to either A, I don't know where to start, or B, I've been at this for months and I am inundated with information and I'm seeing so much conflicting information and all these technologies. I'm overwhelmed by all the noise. I think there's 2 different levels, starting from scratch, and I've been doing this for a while. And both areas of feeling stuck are totally normal across the board. You're going to find job seekers in both camps. Some of the adjustments would be making sure you're taking the right advice from the right people, whether that's getting on LinkedIn and following recruiters who will post advice. They're on the front line of hiring, so their advice is great. If you want to follow career coaches or resume writers, make sure they're getting their information from credible sources, and then make sure you're not overdoing it with information. There's so much information out there, and making sure it's the right information. That's a great way to get unstuck, is just not letting yourself be overwhelmed by all the noise. Just get focused on one or two or three, sources of information. And then making sure that you're being very organized in your approach, saving job postings, keeping track of applications, reaching out to contacts, and then following up, getting really organized with following up. Once you start finding yourself being more organized and keeping track of X, Y, and Z in your search, you're going to start seeing the results, because you're not just winging it and you're not just spraying and praying. You're actually taking a more tactical and strategic approach to your job search. That's where you're going to start seeing the needle move and feel less stuck.
In a nutshell, why do you think some candidates feel they're getting ghosted, and how can they avoid being ghosted?
Putting all of your eggs in one basket can be a problem, meaning, you're just relying on online applications. You're not following up. You're not finding company contacts to learn more about, the teams that you want to join. If you can take a more strategic approach and keep yourself accountable to following up and taking the next step, you're going to find that there's still going to be ghosting. Poor hiring teams, they'll be, knee deep in trying to find someone perfect for the role, and then find out they have to put that on hold because of budget cuts, and that's completely outside of their control. But I think that a big part of just feeling ghosted is that spray and pray method, where they just apply and then they step back and then they wait, and they put all of their trust in the next steps being in someone else's control. Job seekers can take so much more control of their job search, having a little bit of guidance and making sure they're holding themselves accountable to doing the next thing, versus just applying and applying and applying and waiting and hoping that they get a response. So I think it's just a change of perspective that would make the biggest adjustment in feeling like they're being ghosted and actually seeing the responses in their job search.
Wow, Steph, thank you so much for sharing these insights. Your advice definitely cuts through the noise, and I'm hopeful it will help some folks listening to us get unstuck with clarity and confidence. Thank you again.
Oh, you are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Support for this show comes from Western Carolina University, a campus of the University of North Carolina system, with the technical assistance of Kelly Minnis.